Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Experts Podcast. Now, I don't know about you, but there's never enough time to get everything done, am I right? My guest this week is here to help. He's done research on the most common time management issues affecting students and has some great tips to share in today's very actionable episode to help us juggle the large workloads that I know so many of us are trying to pack in. David is the author of The Time Optimized Life and has 35 years of organizational and time management expertise to draw on. And if you're wondering, as I was, we had a gentleman by the same surname, Frank Buck, on time management earlier this year. Two Mr. Bucks in the same year talking about time management. It's a complete coincidence. They are no relation to each other. I found this conversation with David, as per the one with Frank earlier this year, really, really helpful with lots of useful ideas. I think David's, as today, is a really helpful rundown of kind of a lot of time management best practice. And I'm certainly as guilty as anyone for not doing the things I know I should. So I certainly had a few notes to myself on things to do more of or less of following this conversation. Let's meet David and dive right in. David, a very warm welcome to the podcast. If you could just introduce yourself with your name and what you do.
Thank you, William. It's an honor to be here. My name is David Buck, and I am the founder of Kairos Management Solutions and the Infinity Lifestyle Design. Kairos is one of the Greek words for time, and I help individuals, businesses craft a lifestyle strategy that helps improve their use of time and makes their life more productive.
Perhaps we should start there. Expand for us maybe a little bit on what kind of your philosophy is about time management. Kind of what does that mean to you? What are your kind of thoughts on this general subject that you spend your life teaching?
So I have always been fascinated about the use of time. I began my career in sales, and I found out very early on that my stunning good looks, heavy on the sarcasm there, and my charisma didn't get me very far. And I really learned that I needed to be prepared. And to be prepared, I needed to know how to use my time. And that's where I became successful, in that I use my time well, but I also help my clients use their time well. And that carried through to me to want to start my own business then, focusing on that, because I found I was helping friends and friends of friends help and manage their time. And so this fascination of time led to the fact in that as I began to really work with people in earnest, I found they were very reactive in the use of their time. It was very much a first in, first out. Something would happen, people would work to get it done. Meanwhile, all the other things that they intended to do never got done. So I want to flip the script, and I want people to be focused more on being proactive with their time, planning it ahead of time. So you have the ability to then make it easier to adjust if something of a higher priority comes your way.
So what are some of the big pillars? So, zoom out, helicopter view over kind of all the different things you teach. What are some of the big areas, the big pillars you think we need to be thinking about when it comes to meeting that mission?
I break down how I work with clients in 5 different categories, and that's planning, task management, focus, organization, and personal care. And each one of those 5 categories has a set of attributes. But if you were to pick one of those 5 categories, focus is by far the biggest challenge that people have in the use and planning of their time. And within focus, the single biggest attribute that comes to the forefront is distractions. We are so distracted today, and the single biggest element that distracts us for so many is our smartphone. It is an incredibly productive device for us on one hand, but on the other hand, it is designed to distract us via either its own use or all the apps that we download for that smartphone are naturally inclined and designed to distract us.
Well, why don't we start there? We've gone right from the overview right into the sort of specifics. So we've gone to the trickiest area within the trickiest area. That is the issue of phones and distractions. So what are some of your recommendations here?
Well, one of the avenues that people have to realize is how do you, again, go back to this proactive nature or optimize what you're going to do with your phone? And that takes planning up front. So for example, my phone right now is quarantined during our discussion because I don't want to be distracted by it. At the same time, all of my other applications on my computer are shut down as well. So again, I'm going to get no notifications. So the idea is, what can you do to isolate yourself? Not necessarily literally, but figuratively, how do you isolate yourself from those various distractions? And so turning off notifications, silencing where you need to, putting it in a different spot when you have to, proactively reaching out to people if you need to, saying, I'm going to be unavailable for this particular time frame, so I'm not answering any texts or any notifications that come through. And it's all about a what I call a creep, crawl, walk, run. Start small, even if you can do it for 5 minutes, then start to build up eventually. So you're doing full blocks of time where the phone's not even a factor because you're too focused on what else you're doing.
Yeah, the thing about reaching out proactively, I think is quite an interesting one because, often when I'm having a conversation with my coaching clients and they've got an exam coming up and we talk about distraction and we get into this similar conversation, what's distracting you? Well, phone, email, whatever it is. And one of the challenges is kind of people's sense of expectation and, well, either people expect me to be available or to be on call, or my friends want to be able to contact me and I'm be embarrassed if I can't communicate. So, one of the conversations I sometimes have, particularly with sort of younger people and, managing their kind of social communications with their friends over WhatsApp or Snapchat or whatever they're using, kind of maybe setting expectations in your friendship group. Okay, look, between the hours of 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. or whatever it is, I'm just going to be getting my head down and getting my work done. I'm not going to be online at those times. And at 6 o'clock, you'll have my full attention. I'll be back. but I need that time to get on and kind of be successful. And if your friends aren't kind of in that headspace yet, then be brave, lead by example, be the leader in your group. And if your friends aren't willing to respect that, then maybe that's a sign that they don't have your best interests at heart. And that may raise some questions about whether they deserve your friendship. And then to give one other example, a freelance sort of professional who's preparing for some accounting exams I was talking to recently was worried that taking an hour for herself to study for exams first thing in the morning would lead to her clients thinking she was unavailable if she wasn't on email and responding first thing in the morning. And this was kind of causing her some worry. I was worried about putting the time into her study. And I was like, what if something's coming into my inbox and I need to deal with it? And I suggested, put a little thing in your email signature. I've seen quite a few people do this now. Put a thing in your email signature that explains, this is kind of what to expect from me and how I will communicate with you. I'll be available on email between these hours. Expect a response within 24 hours, whatever suits you. And, if there's anything urgent, call me. Here's my number. And just have that as your signature that goes out to all your clients every time you email them. So that you train them in terms of what to expect. Simple one I see some people do. I'm in the office Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, if you work part-time. Yeah. So this kind of idea of reaching out proactively and setting expectations, whether it's your friends, clients, colleagues, whatever is relevant to you. I think that's a really helpful one to think about.
I like how you use the term to train others, and that is totally appropriate in my view, is you're setting expectations. And I used to work my first job out of college, and I'm dating myself, is I worked for a greeting card company, Hallmark Cards, and they did greeting cards. And I remember my boss told me, he said, remember this, there's never been a greeting card emergency. No one has gone to the hospital because of a greeting card. And that stuck with me no matter what I do. And obviously there's going to be listeners here who have a very important jobs. Maybe they are a doctor where there will be emergencies. But for the vast majority of us, we work in a job that the delay is not going to stop anything. So put it into perspective with what you do. I like the fact that you proactively set expectations on when you're going to follow up to say, hey, listen, I'll get back to you within 24 hours. If you're going to deal with me, this is what you can expect, that sort of thing. Most people are very, very forgiving. And I can count on the number of times on my hands I truly had, number one, a work emergency, let alone a personal emergency that necessitated I need to be totally available in order to answer that particular call, text, or whatever that was coming through.
So we talked a bit about kind of phones. You mentioned focus, and phone in particular was kind of one of the big ones. We were chatting a little bit before we hit record. You mentioned you'd run some of your sort of time management diagnostic analysis with a bunch of college students relatively recently. I wondered if you could share any other findings from that. So my guess is what we've been talking about here, phones and distraction features fairly highly on the list of challenges. I wondered if you could maybe talk to some of the other big areas, perhaps that they were finding particularly difficult, or maybe that they were starting to do quite well. So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. The college students that I worked with were part of a program. The idea of the program was to help students navigate through all of the various aspects that they deal with in college, and they do a wonderful job. So some of the results I was surprised to get back at is that the college students were actually very good in planning, and I tie that back to this program that they were in. A heavy emphasis on planning and organization, which, again, if you're a student or whatever, those are probably two areas of which you're navigating depending on your course load and maybe a professional life you're in if you're both a student and in a career. So very strong areas. But again, falling back into the category that was a challenge for them, it was focus. And specifically, distractions was in there. But the other two was procrastination and not allowing interruptions. And that's obviously critical in those two areas in your studies as you try to work your way through, depending on the course load. Both of those can be very detrimental to being able to be focused to doing your coursework effectively.
So procrastination and allowing interruptions. What can we do about these things? Why don't we start with interruptions?
So interruptions, and I'll define both distractions and interruption because some people think, well, isn't that the same thing? And so distractions first, to define that, is that's an internal disruption. That's something on you that you are allowing yourself to be disrupted on something that you should be doing that's more important. Interruptions are the flip side of that. That's an external disruption. That's something that's coming at you that you didn't plan, you didn't know how to do. And so some of the avenues on interruptions, particularly if it's involving coursework and study, is get yourself in an environment where you know the chance of someone interrupting you is diminished. And so if you're, and I do this also with clients who like to work on their bed if they work remotely. So if you're doing your coursework on your bed, I know for me, the only accomplishment I'm probably doing there at some point is sleeping. And so put yourself in an environment that you're not going to be interrupted and can be focused. That's the biggest challenge. The second thing is plan out what you're doing in that particular time frame so it allows you to be focused, so that when someone comes to negotiate you for your time, because most people, when they come to you and say, hey, William, I need your time, they have a problem that's a higher priority for them, that they see you as the person to solve that problem for them. Whereas if you've negotiated this time frame and said, I have got to get this done in this time frame, you can then come back to them and say, great, that's understandable, but let's negotiate a time further down the road that benefits us both. That stops your initial inclination and reaction to say, well, I can just solve their problem for them. So environment and proactively planning, to me, are the two biggest things that you can do to minimize the interruptions that's going to come your way.
Tim Ferriss has quite a nice thing in one of his books that I always remember. It's about, what you say when someone interrupts you and how you respond. And it's not, oh, hi, John, how's it going? What's up? It's straight into, oh, hey, John, I'm just in the middle of something at the moment. What can I help? And kind of encourage them to just get right to the point and kind of avoid the chit chat if you are, literally in the middle of something, just to make it really clear that you're intruding on your time.
Exactly. And I tell people, do a 1 to 10 scale question. And the one that I use is, if someone interrupts me, is, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is, this is not a problem at all. 10, it's a zombie apocalypse. Tell me where your problem is. That then puts it into perspective. And when I use that analogy, just about everybody is well below a 5. So whatever system or analogy you want to use in that case, use something outlandish to put it into perspective so that they can probably say, well, yeah, it's probably not as bad as I think it is.
Let's chat a little bit about procrastination as well. So you mentioned that was another significant challenge. And again, I see that in my own data when I run surveys with students and ask them about some of the challenges they find. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on this one.
Well, procrastination probably has, from the two we've talked about, distractions and interruptions, procrastination probably has the deepest impact both positively and negatively. So if you don't procrastinate, yay for you, you're probably very productive. If you do procrastinate, that has a huge impact on other elements of your life. What typically causes procrastination is it's not a clearly defined goal that what you're doing. As I try to tell people, it's probably a multitask item instead of a single task. And you need to get some specificity around that. So again, if you're a student that says, I have a paper due in 2 weeks, you have not defined enough around what you need to do to accomplish that. And so it's easy for you to say, I'll get to it later. And I am really speaking personally about me in my college days.
Yeah.
That's what I did. And so the idea is, instead of saying I have a paper due in 2 weeks, you break it down and say, I want the outline done in 3 days. I want the introduction written in 4 days. And so break it down into the chunks you need to do, the various micro tasks or tasks as a part of that full task, and break it down into what you need to do through that time frame so you see progress. And when people see progress, then they continue to want to move forward. And as long as you're able to then make it manageable so that you're not the night before trying to complete a 2,000 word paper that has to be turned in, that's a quarter of your grade, you have done plenty of work beforehand so that that last hour is affirming the work you've done and maybe tweaking versus trying to develop it.
People are sort of sitting there thinking, well, I kind of, I've heard this before. I've heard these ideas before. Sometimes just, I'm speaking from experience, like having the words of someone like David ringing in your ears kind of fresh really can just be that trigger you need to kind of go, I know I should do this. Okay, I'm going to actually get on and do it. David told me to do it. and so take the advice, use this as an inspirational nudge to kind of do the right thing. It's great advice. So reminded me of a couple of sort of similar ideas. This idea of kind of breaking it down was something I talked about quite a bit in episode 162 on procrastination recently. Dedicated episode all on procrastination if you're interested in going and having a deep dive on procrastination. But certainly sort of this idea of breaking things down into their sub-steps was a kind of key idea in that. And I talked about the link to the sort of psychological principle of cognitive load theory, which I think is quite relevant on that.
Very much so. Very much so.
And then episode 39 with Brian Tracy, he talked about his ideas of salami slicing and Swiss cheesing the problem, which I quite liked as a metaphor. So, if you're trying to decide how to work on something, sometimes you salami slice and kind of cut off incremental little bits each time, in a kind of logical sequence. Other times it's like a Swiss cheese and there's not sort of a logic to it. You're just like, punch a hole in it in this particular place. And sometimes that idea of, I was just going to pick a bit in the middle and punch a hole in it, and I can kind of give you that momentum to get into the task and start to get it to flow. So I use both of those in my own life, and they can be quite helpful. Okay, so you talked about lack of a clearly defined goal as kind of being an issue with procrastination, which is interesting because one of the things you talked about as being strengths from this particular sample survey you did with the college students was that they were quite good at planning. So tell me a little bit about what you were seeing they were doing well, and kind of what you think generally we should be aiming for when it comes to planning our time well. What does that look like for you?
So within the area of planning, there are 5 attributes tied to that, at least in the system that I use, and that's setting personal goals. It's actually planning ahead. It's looking in the future and not staying in the present. Mm-hmm. It's this idea of being on time for meetings and prepared for meetings, and you can substitute that for classwork or the classes that you attend, and then completing the assignments that are due. So the team did really, really well that I worked with, and there was about 50 students as a part of this work that I did with them. And they all did really well in those elements because that was really the foundation of the work that this organization did with college students. It was going to help them how to plan. Probably what happened, and the reason why there was the disconnect on procrastination, as I talked with some of the students, is they procrastinated on their personal life. And again, this is where time optimization and grouping it and being proactive, it's not separating personal from your professional or your collegiate career. It is combining them all together and working together on one. And that's what I found is, so people are like, I'm focused on my planning. That's really well on their scholastic activities. And then they find they're constantly late to their friends or family events. You got to get those two together and connect those two. But when it comes to planning, if you just do those elements, and as I try to tell people, if you're thinking, I'm horrible at almost just about everything, pick one, because they're all interrelated. So if I do better at planning ahead, I'm more apt to be on time to class. Or if I set personal goals, I'm more apt to do better in school because I understand what's important to me personally. I can focus more on school. It's all interrelated. So pick one, do it well, and I think you'll find other elements in your life will improve.
So let me pick one. And I think I'm a lot better on this than I used to be. But one of the things I've historically struggled with is being on time for things generally. I'm the sort of person that, in an earlier phase of my life in particular, I think this happens less now, but in an earlier phase of my life, I'd be constantly running for trains and missing them and having to get the next one and show up all late and sweaty. That was very much my life for quite a long time. What's your kind of advice for someone in that sort of situation?
I look at a lot of people who, when I say, let me see your calendar, it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, they'll show me their calendar. And what I'll see are a series of blocks that are in there with a bunch of open time. So I say, so what's going on the time that's taken? And in most cases, it's a commitment that they have, or it's a commitment that someone's given them. And so in the case of a student, they'll block off their time when they're in class. And then I said, so what's going on in all the open time? And typically it's like, well, I've got studying here. I'm going to go to work. I got to work for a few hours. I've got to meet some friends. I'm like, well, why isn't that on your calendar? Well, I'll just get to it as it comes along. The challenge with that then is they allow other people who want to use their time to then come in and say, hey, William, I need this problem solved. Can you help me? So I push everybody to plan your calendar 2 weeks out. It doesn't mean it's going to change, because it will. I can't say that today it's Monday, that by the time I'm done with my day, I know something's going to change on my calendar, but I've already planned it out. And that gives you the power to negotiate. When someone comes your way and wants to take up your time with their valuable time, you can then, as we talked about earlier, negotiate a time frame that meets your needs and your schedule. But you can't do that unless you plan up front, invest some time to decide, this is where it's important to me, I'm going to spend my time.
I think that's great advice. One of the challenges with planning, and I definitely agree with what you're saying, I sometimes see students take this, I would think, too far the other way. So, I look at a calendar that's sort of scheduled, every half hour of the day, from early in the morning through to late at night. And I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, it's just kind of an overwhelming amount of commitment to yourself. And I think there's two slightly different challenges. One, the balance issue. You might be trying to get up too early, go to bed too late, and so you're skimping on sleep, not looking after yourself properly. And so if you're having trouble focusing during the day, that's probably just because you're trying to fit in too many hours, and that's more than you can handle. And so the quality of your work has tanked as a result because you're sleepy. The other challenge is, I think, if you're kind of too rigid with your plan and there's too much going on in it, it's almost it's overwhelming, or it kind of doesn't give you enough. Like, it feels too straitjacketed. You're kind of more likely to rebel against it. I feel like there's maybe a sweet spot in between the two extremes. What are your thoughts on this?
Very, very fair. And something I try to tell people as they plan out things is to say, the greater the importance, the activity, the more flex time you need to build into it. So I think a really good structure is, let's say you're going to meet friends for lunch and you intentionally say, I only have an hour, because we can meet with friends and I can meet with my friends, and an hour can turn into 3 hours extremely quickly. Yeah. So that's a great example of saying, I'm going to put a hard structure to this. At the same time, if you're working on something important, whether it's academically or professionally, then I think the idea of a hard stop could be stressful for you, because you might find yourself, I've allocated an hour for this, and at an hour, you're fully in a zone, but you have to stop what you're doing because you have scheduled yourself something else. So if it's very important or a high priority task for you or project, I simply say add 20 to 50% more time on top of it, because that allows you to say, if I'm in a zone, and I'm in a high productivity time frame. Cal Newport has a book called Deep Work. And this idea is, if you're in and very focused and you don't want to disrupt that, you then have the grace and the additional time to go through that. So proportionately consider that, so that, to your point, it's not, I've got to stop what I'm doing, go to the next thing, then stop there and go to the next thing.
And that might mean looking for, okay, well, if they've got this task that may need this extra time, I try and find a part of my calendar, a part of my week where I do have a little bit more time to run. I do have that flexibility. Right. And if I've just got this little chunk of time, can I find something different to work on there, perhaps? The point you made about wiggle time is quite an interesting one. And I think I used the idea of wiggle time before a task as kind of the main way I've sort of overcome that challenge of being late for everything. So, now I'll plan to be, it kind of depends on the circumstance, but, there's a little rule that someone sort of taught me in my 20s, this idea of kind of be an hour early and have a coffee. So if you're like traveling for a commitment and you've got a journey to make, plan to arrive an hour early and just have a coffee when you get there. And there's quite a nice thing to look forward to, that sort of sitting there, you're an hour early, you get a chance to just, sit down with a cup of coffee, maybe get on a bit of planning, do a bit of reading. That's quite a nice time to look forward to. And so that sort of perhaps helps incentivize you to get there on time, as well as the incentive of not arriving all late and stressed because you're running late and stressed from kind of meeting your connections and everything. And then, of course, if it doesn't work out and, things are delayed, connections don't line up properly, then you've kind of got that contingency time built in. I know this stuff's kind of fairly basic, but like convincing myself to actually do it, it took a fair while. These habits aren't unlearned overnight. And I think for me, one of the reasons I was always late to stuff was I always had a lot to do. And so I'd always try and fit in that extra 5 minutes, that extra 10 minutes of doing something before I left the house, to try and squeeze more out of the day. But then that meant I was running late for things. And so that was kind of the issue. So I guess the idea that I can leave and then I can do a bit of extra productive time when I get there over a cup of coffee in a cafe nearby, that really helped me.
And it helps your mindset depending on what that activity is you're going to be doing. So if you get there early and let's say you have to meet with somebody and it's an important meeting, then in your case, you're apt to be in a better mindset and people notice it on the other end. So if you're stressed and fidgety because you just got there, it shows. So there's definitely, not only does managing your time or optimizing your time help you from a tangible standpoint, but it obviously helps your state of mind and how you approach things, and you'll have a clearer mind to be able to be more focused.
We've been talking a little bit about timetabling, scheduling. I just wondered whether you had any other little tips, tricks, things that you see a lot of people doing that you think, don't do that, try this instead. Any other clever little ideas on this kind of general subject that you think listeners might enjoy?
Yeah, I would go back to this aspect that you talked about a little bit, like sleep. Personal care is so underrated as a time management tool, something that will help you get better. A lot of people are like, well, I'm just going to work an extra hour, I'll sleep an hour less and get more done. I really challenge people to say, as it relates to, if you want to have more use of your time, be more productive, try to sleep between 7 and 8 hours a night. And I know some people might, how can I do that? I've got a job, I'm going to school, all that stuff. But the more sleep, if you're sleeping now 5, try 6. Just try to get more sleep. It is an important time for our bodies to recharge. and for us to get ready for the next day. And then I would say take one break a day. I know we were talking about filling your calendar up. I actually have 2 formal breaks I take during the day, and they are to walk my dog around the block. The idea behind that is I get away from the screens, whether it's my computer or my phone or whatever, and it's just simply a chance for me to get out, change my environment. That helps reset my brain to get back into it. And so if you're in studying and you should break that up at some point to just get away from the studying, go outside, do something different. It'll help you reset your brain. And then finally, the third thing under personal care is try to exercise regularly, even if it's 30 minutes, 3 times a week, where you're getting your heart rate up. Something that allows your body to help build itself up for, again, more energy, for more focus. And again, personal care is so underrated, but it's something that you got to invest time that will actually help you be more productive later.
And that's great advice. And I think it's tempting for me to assume that, that's just everyone does that now. But it's not the case. Every quite regularly I'll come across students and scholars that sort of working very long stretches of time without getting up, without having any break. And we'll kind of make that small change of adding in some breaks to give their brain a bit of a rest. And their productivity kind of just shoots up compared to what they're used to, because now they're working with their brain properly engaged because you're not making it work for 6 hours straight without taking a break or something silly. So yeah, it's really, really solid advice. And I think maybe the thing I'd add on these ideas in particular, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I sort of on some level, I know I should be doing that, but I struggle to do it. Take this as a cue to kind of dig into that a little bit more, go and do some homework on this would be my challenge to you listening. Let's say sleep, you're worried you're not getting enough sleep. Great. Well, go get yourself a copy of Why We Sleep, sleep book. It's probably the most widely regarded sleep book. And have a read of that. You won't get much past the second chapter without being very convinced of how helpful it is to get enough sleep. So if David can't convince you, go a little bit deeper. Take that on yourself to go away, do that work, and build up your conviction. When you've got that strong enough why, you'll be able to find ways of making it work. And I think the other general comment I'd make is this sort of time away. This is effectively time away from your works, time away from your studies. To sleep, to take the breaks, to exercise. That doesn't mean your productivity goes down as a result because you're spending less hours. My experience has been that you get more done in the week, not less, when you take the time to look after yourself properly. And that means you are getting disproportionately more done in the remaining hours, such that overall you've taken away some hours, but you get a lot more done in the hours that remain. And overall you get more done in the week. And you have a better work-life balance. So it's a win-win. You don't have to choose between well-being and productivity. I think the way to optimize both is having the balance.
Correct. And I go back to the definition we talked about of kairos at the beginning with time. We all feel time differently. So for example, sometimes if you're in class, you're probably thinking, wow, this hour is taking forever on this lecture. This guy is so boring. This professor's just a joke. And I can't wait till I get out of here. And then you walk out of there and you go meet your friends for coffee or tea. And then you're like, the hour just went by like that. So we perceive time differently. And the idea behind kairos is you turn everything into qualitative time so that you prepare for that lecture. So while it still might be boring, you know what's coming or you're engaged because you've studied for the materials. And then you go meet with your friends. You're focused on what you need to accomplish and what you want to talk about. But I got to get out of there in an hour. Time begins to be more equalized and equally productive so that you're sensing and feeling I'm productive in every element. I'm just not productive in some and weak in the others.
Well, we're kind of sort of starting to bring things full circle. I just wondered, David, is there anything that I particularly haven't asked you that you think would be particularly helpful to share with our listeners that hasn't come up so far?
So one thing that I think also people have this misnomer is that they can multitask. And I am not a fan of multitasking. I think the only people who can possibly multitask are musicians, one who can play an instrument and sing at the same time. That's about as close to multitasking, but it takes hours and hours and hours of practice to be able to do that. And so I am not a fan of saying I can sit there and text my friends while I'm sitting in a lecture and I'm fully engaged in both. My deal is don't multitask, microtask. Decide if you're going to do something. If you need to answer that text with your friend during a lecture, I don't recommend that. But if you have to, go all in then. Cut out what's going on. Answer, be focused there, and then say, I'm in a lecture right now. I'll talk to you later. And then boom, get back quickly to where your focus needs to be, because our brains are not wired to do two things at the same time well. Pick one, own it, but get back to the most important one as quickly as you can.
Fantastic. Well, look, David, thank you. It's been a very helpful conversation. We've touched on, many, many valuable areas: procrastination, focus, how to kind of set up your calendar, staying organized. Yeah, loads of really great stuff. So thank you. If people are interested in learning more about you and the work you do, where should we go next?
So if you'd like to go to infinitylifestyledesign.com, again, that's one word, infinitylifestyledesign.com, and you'll see all the services that I offer. But if you scroll down on the front page, William and I have been talking about this assessment and the data that I've collected from that. If you scroll down on the homepage, you'll see where you can take the assessment for free and get a summary report. It allows you to get an idea on the 5 categories we talked about. Where are you most strong? And then where can your opportunities lie? And so I'd encourage you just to take that. And then also on the page is I have my book, The Time Optimized Life, which also it's sold at all major booksellers online. And if you want a customized, holistic way on how you can optimize and proactively use your time, that's a great resource for you to start there as well.
Wonderful. David, thank you so much for your time again today. It's been really, really fun to chat. Let's go get on with planning how to use our time more effectively. Maybe take 10 minutes, 15 minutes out of your day after this episode to go and do some planning and careful thinking about what your next 2 weeks should look like in terms of your time, in terms of your tasks that you've got to do, and have a really productive couple of weeks ahead. Thank you so much for listening today, and look forward to seeing you on the show soon. Well, thanks again, David. And I will pop all those links in the episode description. And if you'd like to go further on improving your time management or other productivity skills, like your ability to focus well or overcome procrastination, then you may be interested in checking out my self-study workshop bundle, the Productivity Power-Up Pack. It's essentially a collection of 3 masterclasses. Masterclass 1 is a deep dive on the science of procrastination, plus a comprehensive anti-procrastination toolkit of around a dozen strategies. So you've always got the perfect strategy to draw on, regardless of what is triggering your procrastination on this particular occasion. Masterclass 2 is all about maximizing your concentration and developing total focus, alongside a system for managing your time and tasks, which dovetails quite nicely with a few of the comments David was making in today's episode. And finally, Masterclass 3 is about how to find more energy for your studies. And as with all my self-study classes, the Power Up Productivity Bundle is included at no extra cost for Study Smarter members. Otherwise, you can pick up the full bundle at examstudyexpert.com/productivity. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I will look forward to seeing you again soon and wishing you every success in your studies in the meantime.
Well, that was good, wasn't it? I found myself taking notes. If you need a reminder of anything from today, head to the website for a write-up of this episode, as well as lots more top-notch advice and resources. That's examstudyexpert.com. See you next time.